Clare Lopez, who was on my buddy Don the Pleb show. Everybody go check that out. I'll put the link in the description. Don's a badass. Claire's a badass. Last week, and for everyone who's wondering who Claire is, we've done a couple episodes now. You can go back and find them. Because as Don said, your resume is too impressive to state in less than 5 minutes. So, but we finished up last week, and there were two topics. We got on EMPs, but we also got on food shortages and using a bioweapon to depopulate the United States. And with both of those, you said that's another podcast. And, well, now it's been a week, and now we're here. So I don't know what today's episode is. I'm putting the ball entirely in your court.
Well, we could pick up where we left off, and where that was, I think we were talking about China, right? And the Chinese Communist Party. And I think I referred to a book called Unrestricted Warfare, which was published in 1999 by two colonels in the People's Liberation Army of China, who wrote it as their master's thesis, I guess joint master's thesis. And then it was published by the PLA and then translated into English, I don't know, some years later, but you can get it now online. It's available, Unrestricted Warfare. And there is a section in there that makes a list of, I don't know, a couple dozen or more areas of warfare that the Chinese consider to be legitimate, areas for fighting adversaries like us. And among them are things that you would expect, like conventional warfare, maybe nuclear warfare. There's something they call diplomatic warfare. There's network warfare. And they also explicitly say biochemical warfare. It's written out, in black and white in there. And so I think then last time I referred to a column written by my friend Jeff Nyquist at his blog with that name, Jeff Nyquist blog. And it was written, that entry, that blog was written last fall. I'm thinking, if I remember right, it was about October of 2020. And in that blog piece, Jeff wrote about a secret speech. Well, at one time it was secret, of a very senior Chinese Ministry of Defense official, since passed on. I think he died about 2005 or so. So this speech was prior to that. Not quite sure, but around 2002, 2003. His name was Shi Haoxian. And in that speech, he very openly talked about depopulating the North American continent, the United States, using biological warfare. And he very also explicitly talked about the need of the Chinese for Lebensraum. Now, if some might remember that term, it's space. One that was used by Hitler, right, before World War II, saying or justifying, the invasion by the Nazis of the Sudetenland in then Czechoslovakia, and the rest of the invasions that followed, that Germans, if there was German population in some place, then the Nazis had the right to invade that place for Lebensraum, meaning living space for Germans, right? Well, Shi Haoxian, this Chinese minister, or I don't think he was a minister, but he was a senior official in the Ministry of Defense, he used that term. And the only positive, spin I could put on this even slightly is the fact that looking at demographic trends now, and I'm not sure if we touched on this or not, but relying on work done, for example, by good friend David Goldman, who writes under the pseudonym Spengler at AsiaTimes.com. Spengler, after, the German philosopher Oswaldo Spengler, AsiaTimes.com. But he's also sort of come out now, and we all know now that Spengler is David Goldman, but he writes on a number of topics, but China especially, and demographics in China. And he talks about how due to the one-child policy of years past, but also, the abortion and the infanticide of female babies in China over a very long period of time. There are something like 30, I think I saw the number like 32 million. I mean, I don't know if that's the right number, but millions and millions of Chinese men who will never find wives or have children and families. So that population decline is going to happen in China, but how soon, nobody can be sure. How long it'll take, decades probably through the rest of this century, the 21st century. But in the meantime, before that happens, there are all of these wiveless men with no prospects. They call them bare branches in China, by the way, meaning they'll have no families. But so even though the population is going to decline, and this is a question mark, I mean, does the Chinese senior leadership, Xi Jinping and the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, et cetera, do they still hold to what was published by the PLA back in Unrestricted Warfare in 1999 and the probably 2002 or 3 speech of Xi Haoxian? Is that policy? Question mark. I don't know, but it's ominous that it's out there in any case.
Yeah, it's an interesting question to be posed. I mean, is this planned? Is China, my buddy David O'Neill brought a good term that I hadn't heard of, but I think it's called black box, and it's the idea that your enemy basically has it all together. It's kind of like it's like a nation state extrapolation of the idea that everyone else has their life together but you. You look at your friends and you're like, married, kids, lawn. But if you went and talked to them, they're probably looking at you like, oh, look at that guy, he's doing, and you're like, oh, we're all wandering directionless and terrified. But it's the idea that the enemy has it together. And so, part of me looks at China's, decreasing growth rate, and it's like, oh, that's part of the CCP Master Plan 2049. But another part of me is like, it seems like that's part of their power is having, 1.3, 1.4 billion people. It seems that, what they lack perhaps in technology or advancement, they can sort of just, they can McDonald's it, they can supersize it. They just have every person they have, for every person we have, they have 5. It makes you wonder.
China has long had a large population with relationship to either neighboring countries or even the rest of the world. And now up to something like 1.4 billion. I don't know to what extent they foresaw the abrupt decline in population that's going to happen later this century when they instituted the one-child policy. I mean, of course, that's what they wanted to do to curb their what they would think of as runaway population growth. But at the same time that they did that, they also were expanding in a lot of other ways, meaning technology, meaning the ability to provide for, including jobs and housing and everything else, provide for the population that it does have. And I think, we've talked on here before about how in one generation, that grandparent today grew up in a hut with a dirt floor and no heating or indoor plumbing, and subject to the whims of the weather for whether the crops would come through that year. And in that one person's lifetime, they now live in some gleaming high rise in a modern city that's, maybe 10 or 20 years old maximum, with, of course, central heating, central air conditioning, probably Wi-Fi throughout the building, and, obviously electricity and plumbing, right? So they were doing 2 things at once. They were curbing the population growth at the same time as they were expanding, I mean, by very brutal means, but leaps and bounds, in their development. Now, did they foresee such an abrupt decline in the population? I don't know. Maybe they had, Maybe they did. I don't know. But in any case, for the time being, they still have all of these, wiveless young men with no prospects of family life in any case. So that is that's in front of us right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think the unrestricted warfare, the use of biochemical warfare and Lebensraum, I can't ever say that right, living space, are we going to see that in our life? Now, is that necessarily, because as you touched on last time, you can't affect it. It's, I believe it's what Truman said. It's like the hydrogen bomb has a built-in policy of extermination. It's not, you drop an A-bomb on Hiroshima. A lot of people think A-bombs and H-bombs are the same. An A-bomb you drop on Hiroshima, you wipe it out. A hydrogen bomb you drop on Hiroshima, and you kind of make all of Japan unoccupiable. That being said, unless you're going for a genocidal agenda, nuclear weapons aren't the way to go, because you irradiate the land, you destroy every structure. There's really nothing to go settle, versus if you want to go take everything. It's not like as a corporation you want to do a hostile takeover. You don't want to nuke the other place. They've got a lot of goods. So
right.
What you touched on last time was, and that's why you would use something like biochemical warfare. It's the same reason you don't take a flamethrower to your house when you have ants. You just fumigate it. Mm-hmm. Now, are we going to see that? This is obviously all hypothetical, but could we see, just if we have all of these bare branch men, and we have in unrestricted warfare, and then we touched on you can't use irradiation, do you think we could see China expand to India or to any surrounding areas and find spouses for their people and expand their land? It's all speculation.
The lands, the countries around China's periphery, certainly to the south, including India, are themselves pretty well populated places.
India's
right?
number 2. Yeah.
Now, the one place that is not thickly populated would be to the north, and that's Siberia, which has tons of resources, minerals, lots of oil, and other things, timber, fur. Now, would China be inclined to expand there? Very inhospitable climate. As a matter of fact, that's what I wrote my master's thesis on.
Really?
The economic possibilities or development of Siberia. I was writing it from a Russian perspective, but if the Chinese are looking at that, and of course, the Russian population itself is declining. It's in a demographic death spiral pretty much, despite the best efforts of Putin, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, to incentivize families and children and so forth. They're just not doing it. And in any case, the population that Russia does have is mostly concentrated west of the Urals and not out in the frozen tundra of Siberia. So is that a place that China would consider expanding into? Perhaps for exploitation, but I don't see necessarily a population shift to Siberia, just because it is so inhospitable in terms of climate, but not to the south. No, because those places, India, as you say, number 2 in population in the world, and then you come around to, all of the other Southeast Asian countries, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and Thailand, and Burma, and Cambodia, and so forth, and they too are pretty well populated, fertile. Fertile as long as China doesn't dam up all the rivers like the Mekong and others. But fertile agriculturally, good climates for growing things in those places, but very populated. So, aside from the takeover of Hong Kong, which is pretty much a fait accompli now, and continuing aggressive moves towards Taiwan, there aren't places, readily available for Chinese population to move to. But, the question remains, are they still looking at the North American continent? Now, there was another defector from the Soviet Union back in the day, and this was Stanislav Lunev. And Stanislav Lunev, in a way, also like Anatoly Golitsyn, talked about the alliance between Soviet Union, Russia, and China, and that they together were planning this takedown of the United States and expansion into our lands, and that would include Canada, North America, Canada, U.S., not Mexico. And both of those defectors from the Soviet Union talked about that. Is that still the plan? I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of threads to touch on right there. I was going to say, first, I couldn't help but smile, and it's like, is China going to go into Siberia? And it's like, are we going to see a hat trick of nations trying to go into Russia, and then the inevitable winter comes? Is the meme going to keep reproducing itself? Napoleon, Operation Barbarossa. Are we going to see it a third time? But
or they just go into Siberia to expropriate the natural resources,
sure,
not to grab living space per se. I mean, unless some kind of entirely, new technology makes life there more hospitable. But a natural resource grab, sure, I could see that easy.
Well, I mean, mini nuclear reactor. I mean, that's enough you can run anything for a while. You just go get little outposts. Not that I know anything about that. But with India, you're right, the number 2 population. But we did see Indian-Chinese clashes in 2020, did we not?
Yeah, a number of them, some, very primitive, by the way, oddly not fought with modern day weapons, rifles or RPGs or mortars or anything like that, but with clubs and rocks.
Wait, really?
I mean, absolutely primitive fighting up along the India-China border in the Himalayas, up in the mountains. And the Indians, they defended themselves. They acquitted themselves very well.
I didn't know. I didn't know.
They're not going to be, pushed around.
Do you see? Okay, I didn't know that. I had no idea. That's unique. One thing that's kind of been on my mind. So we have Hong Kong. We have Taiwan. We have the South China Sea. Do you see? Was it my buddy David O'Neill keeps bringing up Thucydides' trap? Are we destined for war with China? And furthermore, with China having 30% of the world's rare earth metals, but 90% of the world's trade and those are utilized in electronics, are they the new Middle East of resources we need?
Not to the Thucydides trap, not necessarily. That, by the way, for your viewers, posits that in a competition between a rising power and an established power, it's almost, if not inevitable, that there will be warfare. And I don't necessarily see that as the inescapable outcome. I think that deterrence in this age would go a long way. Not that the current occupants of our White House are thinking in this direction, but they should be, and certainly the Trump administration thought this way. Deterrence and a strong foreign policy that very clearly lays out red lines. This administration not really doing that so much. But get back to the rare earth minerals. The United States actually has quite a lot of rare earth minerals.
Really?
We just haven't mined them. And the other thing then is that there's a long and arduous process of refinement for the way that they're found in the earth. They need to go through very expensive and kind of tedious process of refinement, but we could do it. We have a lot of rare earth minerals in the United States.
So, yeah, okay. I didn't know that. So now, is China? Is it a paper tiger? is the whole idea of biochemical warfare, unrestricted warfare, the warring states period, the 100-year marathon, everything they want to do by 2049. Is this a paper tiger?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. China is very definitely, visibly, observably putting its money, its development, its technology where its mouth is, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They are expanding their military, especially their Navy, at a furious pace. And that includes all kinds of surface vessels. It also includes submarines, and it also includes aircraft carriers.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the technological expansion into space with satellites and satellite killers. Mm-hmm. And then also in the cyber arena, certainly with 5G. I mean, everywhere you look, China is investing massive amounts of money into all these modern technologies, whether it be for civilian or military use. That is something that, again, back to my friend David Goldman, he warns over and over again. If we here in the United States don't stop turning out gender studies and underwater basket weaving majors, we are going to fall behind and we will never be able to catch up. Now, what have the Chinese done over the past year? Just take the last year of 2020. They are waging chemical warfare, biological warfare against us. Biological, obviously, with the CCP virus. Mm-hmm. Whether it got out by accident or on purpose, let that be. But they certainly allowed it and ensured that it spread to the whole world once it did get out. Chemical warfare, the fentanyl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had on the author of Fentanyl Inc., Ben Westhoff.
So, that is chemical warfare.
Yeah.
It's going through and using the Mexican drug cartels to bring that product into the United States. But that is chemical warfare.
Yeah.
So, they're very, very much engaged in, if I went down the list of those areas, spheres of warfare in unrestricted warfare, they're hitting on just about every one of them right now.
Yeah, no, and there's always the misconception, if you respect your enemy, it's the idea that you're sympathetic to them, and I don't think that's the case at all. You have to respect their complete across the board. I said that last year. I said if you couldn't take, this is before COVID came out, I was saying if you can't take on the United States with tanks and bombers and you take it on economically, if that's not doing it, what would you do? You'd flood the country with a highly addictive, super cheap, super small dose, highly lethal substance like fentanyl. I mean, we see it with the opium wars. Why wouldn't you do that? Flood the border with opium, flood it with COVID, and it happens as soon as Trump goes with a tariff war against them or a trade war against them. And it's also ironically with COVID, it's the same time everything about all the cameras turned off. Metaphorically, they all turned off in Hong Kong. It's an overarching, it's an anaconda wrapping around the world, and it is tightening more and more and more. And to one thing I've been thinking of a lot is reading about the China programs that I don't know if they're recent or if we're just hearing about them recently, but they've come into my consciousness in the last week or two. Is their massive program to start increasing masculinity in boys, whether through chemicals or whether just through, again, something I completely respect. It's like if you go back and look at black and white films from like the 50s, it's like boys at PE and they're learning like hand-to-hand combat, they're learning how to scale, and they're shooting like at school. And now it's at, for instance, Planet Fitness, their videos online, if you grunt, a chirping alarm goes off, like a fire alarm. And it's to bring awareness to everyone in the gym that there's someone showing toxic masculinity. Good grief! Doing bench press.
This is not a recipe for success.
I don't think it's. Maybe it's a conspiratorial mind, but I'm starting to think if we're looking at something like fentanyl, if we're looking at something like COVID, I don't think this is an accident. I think what better way to do it? Infiltrate the country and be like, hey guys, being a man is bad, and then at the same time in your country be like, guys, get going. to me, I'm starting to think that this is part of I mean, maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I'm just seeing the Chinese tiger everywhere.
No. It comes together.
It does, right?
It is part of the whole. It is part of the entire whole strategy.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
But we're doing a lot to ourselves too.
Yeah.
Which is horribly destructive. And, I didn't even mention, as part of the CCP virus last year, the enormously destructive measures that our communist mayors and governors took here in the United States to lock everything down and keep kids out of school.
Yeah.
So millions and millions of American students from, preschool all the way to university have essentially lost at least a full year of instruction. Now, not all of them, a number of private schools remain open now, but they're a minority and serve a minority of students in the country. But the majority of students in this country have literally lost a year. Mm-hmm. How do you ever make that up?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they can make it up. Or if they're even going to try to make it up. And teachers' unions, communist Marxists to the core, they could care less about kids, but at least our eyes are open now as to what teachers in this country are really about.
Yeah.
Not about the kids.
Yeah.
Still to this date, which is March 18, 2021, won't go back to teach. Mm-hmm. Don't want to go back to teach. They want to keep receiving their paychecks, of course, mm-hmm. but they don't want to teach. Mm-hmm. They want to just sit home and maybe once in a while hop on a computer, but they don't want to teach. They should all be fired. You go back to the classroom immediately or you're fired.
Yeah.
There are others who will take their places, for sure.
Well, we're also seeing, again, unrestricted warfare. What other way would you do it? But not only that, I could be fake news. I need to fact check this, but that Chinese economy is set to overtake the United States by 2035. But after COVID, it's now the projection say 2028. I don't think that's an accident.
Not sure. I'm not sure that the Chinese economic recovery is as their numbers would suggest. Their numbers, of course, always being suspect, to say the least. Mm-hmm. They also had a sharp economic turndown. And the sanctions from the Trump presidency had an effect and continue to have an effect. And one thing that's underway that began then but continues now of its own momentum is the return of U.S. companies, and I suspect others around the world, to their home countries or relocated to other places, because everyone has realized that sourcing your product supply chain to China is not a very good idea.
Yeah.
At least if you don't have backup in other places. So that also has had an economic effect inside of China in terms of, orders and production and all of that. Not quite sure about the Chinese economy right now, but I'm not sure that they're on track either. Okay. But we're not either.
Okay. No, that's good. Because I have to be self-aware, because I can get riled up and be like, the Chinese are and it's like, no, hey, let's look at, because again, a little side note, I can't make fun of my liberal friends for 4 years screaming Trump is a Russian Manchurian candidate, and then the next day be like, China's at the door. Like, I have to be aware, be like, that might not be true. Don't bang the drums just yet. But
yeah, the numbers are just difficult. Good solid numbers are just kind of difficult to come by, and I'm not an econ finance expert. So more research to be done on that.
Sure. So, excuse me. Now, is so listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson's Accessory to War, and talking, it really, the whole thing, it's the marriage between the scientific community and the defense industry, which isn't groundbreaking information. Everyone knows that, but he goes back and he paints this whole picture all the way back to how when explorers would go to the New World, they would use their advanced knowledge of astronomy they knew when like a lunar eclipse was coming, so they'd go to the peoples and be like, in 3 days my god will blot out the sun or something, and if that happens, hand over your women in gold, and then it would happen. But the entire idea was it was using advanced science to subjugate new peoples. And then the book eventually evolves into the use of physicists to develop things like GPS and satellite technology, and it's the marriage between all of that. And he finally paints this picture of how space, it truly is. We look at things on the Earth, but the reality is space is the fastest growing field for economic and military advantages. And then we see, on another side note, we see the development of the Space Force, which 1945 and then up until 1947, we didn't have an Air Force. We had the U.S. Army Air Forces. Just like they had ground forces, they had air forces. It got so big, and then eventually seeing the need, because all the massive bombing waves over Germany, Dresden, and then obviously into the Pacific, we saw the need for a massive air wing, split it apart into the Air Force. Curtis LeMay, shout out, love Curtis LeMay. And then they eventually take over, right, Cyber Command, and then I think Space Command. And it's been, 47 to 20, we'll call it roughly 70
last
years.
Year.
Yeah. So, 70.
Last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, so 73 years. Eventually it breaks up to another level to where it's kind of, we had the Air Force Space Forces, we create the Space Force. Say all of that word jumble to say, is that a frontier where the United States could get the high ground? And I know we talked about China going up into space. Obviously they have the killer satellites. I believe 2007 they blew up one of their own satellites with an anti-sat missile. Is that an area that, if we get dominance of, does that greatly put it, and it's kind of a stupid question, it's kind of a no shit answer, but is that an area that if we pursue aggressively, the returns could be disproportional? We could completely hedge the Chinese growth.
Absolutely. I mean, they're not going to stand still just because we surge, sure. Right? They will be doing that too. But absolutely, I mean, what President Trump did last year, 2020, with the establishment of the Space Command, was incredibly important. And obviously, they will grow and expand now. But that is the new frontier, and everything that happens, here on Earth, can and will in some way be subject to or dependent on what goes on in space. And dominance of space will be incredibly important for the defense of the United States. Yes.
FYI, when I pull my phone out, I'm making a note. I'm not texting. I don't want anything to be disrespectful. I hate, every once in a while I have a guest on and I can see them looking off screen at their phone, and I'm like, dude, don't waste my time. But yeah, it seems like that's the overarching ground where if we can expand into that, and again, this is in my incredibly limited 30-year-old biology degree mind. I don't have, I'm not a military tactician. But it seems like that is the ultimate high ground that perhaps, and it's when I say this, I say it very relatively and generally, it seems like the rest of China's moves may not be as dangerous if we can take that new. Russia's massive tank columns after World War II weren't as big as a threat as they were prior to July 16th, 1945, because now we had tactical A-bombs. It all of a sudden it offsets it until, of course, 49, Russia develops Joe 1, and next thing we know, we're right back at it. It seems like if we can get a viable hand in space or a definitive edge, perhaps not to scoff at COVID or fentanyl or economic warfare or the Belt and Road Initiative or their Lebensraum, maybe going to Siberia, South China Sea, their fake islands, their massive navy. I think they're on track to have more nuclear submarines than us. If we can get a definitive edge in space, it might have that same effect. And now the question comes in, do we, or have we already, and I don't know if you can speak on this, not that you would, I don't know how you would, are we going to eventually build space weapons if we have not already? There's obviously the whole treaties about no one's allowed to do that, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but when vying for global control and the survival of a nation, You tend to throw those rules out the window, just like the Soviet Union did with bioweapons treaties. After the wall fell, a bunch of biologists from Russia came over and joined DARPA, and they said, oh yeah, no. I just read last night something about some biologists coming over from the Soviet Union. They were mixing Ebola with influenza.
Kenyatin Alibekov, who wrote the book Biohazard. Yeah.
Okay.
Shortened his name mercifully to Ken Alibek.
Oh, I've tried to get him on here.
His original name is Kenyatin Alibekov. He was from Kazakhstan.
I've been trying to get him on here. He won't respond. But
I don't know if he's active in the field anymore. But certainly when he came out with that book, well, he defected. He defected, first of all, from Russia in 1992, I think, which is after the breakup of the Soviet Union, when they were supposed to have given up all their biological weapons and programs. But before him, another defector had come out by the name of Pasechnik. But they both came out of this sprawling network of labs and research facilities in the Soviet Union, Russia, called Biopreparat. And Biopreparat was their civilian cover for what was absolutely an offensive militarized biological weapons program. I see China pretty much doing the same thing, following the same strategy, the same blueprint today. And Russia probably still has much of that program in place. But after, of course, Pasechnik and Ken came out, the Soviet Union, Russia, moved to conceal, even more so, conceal that program, just as China today conceals its biological weapons program, which is centered, by the way, within the Ministry of Defense in PLA-controlled labs. But anyway, that goes back a ways.
Yeah, I tend to think that nothing truly is off the table, and part of my mind, again, I always try to keep it open and explore everything, is that the United States, we never, and this is all speculation, but in my mind, I don't think it's that odd to think that we've probably been practicing unrestricted warfare, and maybe we're just smart enough to not publish the paper that says we're doing as such. Because, I mean...
Well, no. I mean, we are signatories to the Biological Weapons Convention of the early 1970s and to the Chemical Weapons, let's see, how does that go? The Chemical Weapons Convention. It's got a much longer name. And I mean, I know that we destroyed
under Nixon
our chemical and biological weapons production and facilities and weapons. And I witnessed that. I saw that with my own eyes.
Wait, really?
Yes. I visited places where they were doing that destruction of, the shells, breaking the shells open, emptying them out, destroying it. Yeah.
Well,
we complied with that.
Okay.
There are many places around the world that remain signatories to the Biological Weapons Convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention, that have observed them more in the breach than not. I'll name the Damascus regime of Bashar al-Assad, for one. Obviously, places like Iran and China, which are all signatories to these. But again, observed more in the breach than not. So if you're talking about space now, we here in the United States have tried to promote the non-militarization of space, but that's not realistic. It's just not going to happen. But our first programs for space really came under President Ronald Reagan, right? With a strategic defense initiative, emphasis on the defense part of that, Brilliant Pebbles and all of those programs that were ridiculed at the time. But Ronald Reagan was ahead of his time in thinking about this.
Yeah.
And those programs need to be revived like ASAP.
Yeah.
Certainly the defensive part of those and the high ground, as you call it, in space is absolutely critical to defensive postures here on Earth, meaning the ability, for example, to see launches, of missiles, nuclear weapons potentially. And that's what space would provide, as well as the myriad satellites that are now up there, giving us look down capability from GPS to everything else, wartime war fighter capability of communicating over the horizon and that sort of thing. So I mean, for now, we, as far as I know, are adhering to defensive use of space, but others most likely are not. But here's the other thing: because of the emphasis that we've put on space exploration, for example, we've got rovers crawling across the landscape of Mars right now. And beaming back photos, which are amazing.
I had on the head of NASA's JPL.
Yeah, just incredible. So because of the innovative capabilities of the United States and the encouragement of innovation, which is not the same thing as a centralized government authority, program handed down to your military. You will go do this and this and this, and don't you dare deviate. That's a whole nother mindset where I think our philosophy, the way that we encourage innovation and out of the box thinking, I think that still gives us here in the United States an edge over regimes like China's.
And I always do. I mean, I understand that I'm an archetype, not an archetype. I'm a trope, a caricature of the conservative, and I'm always bad socialism, communism. Hey, I get that. I'm aware of it. I mean, I know, but like I also look at it from like a tactical standpoint, or I look at it from my education as finally I can use it. My biology degree, I got in a medical and pharmacy school. I'd like to think I have a head on my shoulders. Natural selection and genetic evolution. I mean, it is not a top-down thing. It is a completely chaotic, ground-up thing. I mean, down to the most famous studies, obviously, are the Galapagos Islands, but then the more recent, like last 40 years book, Beak and the Finch, where they go in and they kind of measure evolution in real time, where they go in and they see, I mean, like 1/32 of an inch thicker beak, it completely changes and you see these tiny little edges, right? I mean, something as small as like but
it's over time, it's over millennia that these things prove their advantage.
Yes, but at the core, it's still what it is it's a tiny little thing. I mean, it's the click wheel on the iPod versus something else, right? It's the touch screen versus it's these little things, and I truly think at the core, that is the difference. And as much as I love the United States, and we just so happen to be the center of it, I don't even think it's a United States thing. I think it's the very notion of a free society where
it's a Western civilization thing.
Yes, but I think that's our biggest. I think that's our biggest weapon is our ability to compete against each other. And if you get the better one, you can buy the Lamborghini in the pool in the backyard. But that is ultimately what leads to bigger and better things. People defect to the. I mean, if you really want to, I used the analogy the other day with my friend. When there were like parties in college, I remember when I was looking at all the fraternities when I was a dumb freshman, I mean, there was the coolest one. And as long as there's a cooler one, people will defect from other places. But that leads to things like rovers on Mars or Brilliant Pebbles, SDI, X-rays in space, Edward Teller, all that great stuff. I think that's our greatest weapon. And I think that's what ultimately as long as there is a place for the drain to empty, there will be a brain drain, We have what's our one notorious defector from the United States to the Soviet Union? Lee Harvey Oswald, right? Maybe, not our best player versus every defector from East Berlin to West Berlin, or from the Soviet Union to us, or even, I would say, probably less known, the CCP to us. But it seems like that is our greatest asset. Back to SDI, I love SDI, and I love Reagan's enthusiasm for it, and I love how that's at the Reykjavik meeting with, I think it was Gorbachev, where they got really close to doing no nuclear weapons. They were if you actually read the transcript, it actually kind of sounds like something out of like a movie. They're like, why don't we just do no nuclear weapons? And we could do it. We could do it right now. And finally Gorbachev is like, yes, and no SDI. And Reagan's like, no, we want SDI. But yeah. But the way he explains it, I love his explanation of it, and I think it's in dead hand. The author goes into it, but Reagan uses it as a gas mask. He calls it like the nuclear gas mask. And he's like, if we can develop a nuclear gas mask, it won't matter. There will be no purpose to building nuclear weapons. And then we can share that technology with everyone. I agree with you. I think he was light years ahead, and I hope it comes back. I hope it's been back for a while. Sorry, I know I just went on a rant.
No, you make good points. And I agree.
But you can I keep you for another 12 minutes? Is that okay?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
I'm weird. I like to go on moments. But with SDS, so I think back to that, right? And we did destroy chemical weapons. Annie Jacobson talks about that a lot in her book Operation Paperclip, and obviously lesser known, we brought back scientists from Unit 731 in Japan, all of their chemical guys, whereas the Germans were the rocket scientists, but also chemical. Point is, with the X-37B, the thing that looks like a mini space shuttle, that I believe we launched in the late 2000s, and it's gone on consecutive, sorties for longer and longer flights, breaking records. I think its best one to date was something like 600 or 700 days in orbit, and it can change orbits, and it is rumored to have the ability to tamper with satellites and go up there, and I would imagine open up and sort of surgically mess with them. Was that the beginning of the Space Force, and have we weaponized space? If we can go up and kind of act as surgeons on satellites, man, we could also go up and deploy kinetic warheads, or,
I mean, unfortunately, that's inevitably where things will go, simply because that's what America's adversaries are doing. China, Russia will. But I'll tell you what really catches my attention, and I don't know, really is encouraging and a testament to the American spirit. And that's a guy like Elon Musk, right? Totally a private, enterprise kind of a guy. He's not the U.S. government, but look what he's doing. He is developing, a space capability, launch capability, certainly, to put satellites into orbit. And he's doing it on private initiative, private funding, and private brilliance, to put it simply.
Yeah.
That's the United States. Can you imagine anything like that ever happening in a communist party of China? No, of course not.
No, not at all. I mean, the only reason the Soviet Union was able to build the Buran and the Energia was because we put all of the plans for the space shuttle out in public. They didn't have to do the research. They could look at it. But even now, you can see, so we don't even have to say, can you imagine a China doing that? You can bring it back into the United States and look at the bifurcation. We have NASA SLS, right, the Space Launch System,
Mm-hmm.
which is years behind budget and billions of dollars over budget. Over budget, years behind schedule.
Over budget.
Brain fart. And then we look at Elon landing rockets, bringing down the pound per kilogram or the dollar per kilogram cost down with Starlink, right? That's going to become, if it's not already, a decentralized internet around the world.
Amazing.
If that, you can just look at what private does with that, but not only that. So you could then say, well, I know, because he's talked about it. Elon Musk is in bed with the NRO and with other and National Geospatial agencies because he can put things up for cheaper and clearly, and he can put up a ring of however many thousands of satellites. I think that, then this is my conspiratorial mind, I don't think the Space Force was necessarily created so much as declassified in the last couple of years. And again, that's my tinfoil hat theory. But I think it's absolutely the case where I don't think SDI went away, or it did, and we brought it back because you have to have it. And it's back to what Truman said. Truman's 7-minute meeting about Project Campbell. Campbell's in Campbell soup. Soup meant super. Super meant the H-bomb. 7-minute meeting when he went in there with the scientists, and he said, when will the Soviets be able to do it, and will they be able to do it? And they said, we think within 3 to 4 years. And he said, all right, we'll get to it. All the other scientists, Fermi, they called the H-bomb an evil thing. But Truman's logic was, he didn't think it was any less evil. But if they can do it, we're going to be shit out of luck if they do it and we don't. So we have to, right? You can only be as good as the world lets you to be. I think that's the case with space warfare. I think that's what the X-37B is. I think that's what the Space Force is. I would imagine there's some sort of, marriage with Elon Musk. I think that we probably have a functional SDI to an extent, because if we don't do that, someone else is, and it's going to be China. I know I'm going way off into the weeds now, but
no, I think you're right, and I'm very glad to see the establishment of the Space Command last year. I'm sure it was in development or on its way for a long time before that. That was the formalization of its establishment. But that will carry us through this century and into the next. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then I have for 2 future podcasts, I would like to talk to you about your thesis. I think that would be a badass episode.
A long time ago.
Well, I mean, you can pull some facts out. I don't care. But also, would you be able to do an episode on SDI? Because I am obsessed with it, but I can't find a good book on it, and so I'm just scattered.
I'll do my best. It's not my area of expertise, but I'll point you in the direction of Ambassador Hank Cooper. Ambassador Hank Cooper actually worked on SDI in the Reagan years.
Okay.
And he is still involved very much in these topics, together with people like Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and linking us into things EMP, nuclear, and cyber related. But Ambassador Hank Cooper, I think, would be a good place to look. Just because he was right in the middle of all that. Mm-hmm. A brilliant guy. Today his focus has moved more to defense against EMP phenomena, but still I would look him up if you want to learn or see more about SDI, where it was then in the Reagan years, where it can go now, what we can look forward to.
Okay. And I've tried to get on Lieutenant General James Abramson, who was the head of SDI. I think he's 90 now, but apparently he still works on I think he's on a board of directors for a defense contractor. I've been trying to get in touch with him for a year, but I can't get in touch with him. But all the videos I watch on him, it's him, it's 60 minutes, but it's in the 80s and 90s. He's the guy. He's the guy talking about brilliant pebbles and projectiles and garages of missiles and directed energy weapons and everything, hitting a bullet with a bullet. I can't for the life.
Well, Ambassador Cooper is a little bit younger than that.
Awesome.
But also still very active.
Yeah. Well, you get some, you don't get others. I got a formal rejection from the office of Jim Mattis, George Bush, Leon Panetta, Henry Kissinger. They've all kind of given me the finger, but I'll keep. Oh no, you're right. I know, boo-hoo. So I'm going to keep trying. But well, let's wrap this one up, Ms. Lopez. Thank you so much for coming on. I love talking to you. It's
thanks for having me again.
No, you are a truly fantastic guest. Trust me. I mean, I don't do favors for anyone. I don't bring people back on. Oh, all right, I'm not feeling bad. Trust me. You've got into the weekly slot. That's the upper echelons. Not that this podcast is anything to shake a stick at, but
okay.
You're in the pantheon of guests now. So
wow, I'm there.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I know this is the big leagues, right? I know Joe Rogan looks up to me, right? I've got a whopping 3,000 subscribers, but
and growing, right?
Growing. Hey, I'm training against YouTube censorship. You know what? It's kind of like when NBA players train with weighted vests, so when they take it off during the off season with them, so during the season they can, it's jump higher, kind of run faster without the. My logic is I'm training with a weighted vest. I'm training against suppression, hiding views, hiding search results. So whenever I finally break free of the sort of YouTube thumb, I imagine I'm gonna explode, or maybe
take off.
or maybe that's my own delusions. Either or.
No, look ahead.
Yes,
Here we
ma'am.
go.
Yes, ma'am. Either way.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you
Always
so much.
good to be with you.
Absolutely.
And I'll look forward to next week.
Yes. Thank you so much. Take
care.
All right.
Take care, you too.
All right. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.